and I ended up sliding totally sideways across that second intersection. Not having my original set of legs is a bit of a disappointment. You know, there's a lot of things I miss. I really miss just being able to go for a run. I have to think about and plan everything I do now. You know, just even going to check the mail. I'm sitting in my wheelchair at home. I'm not messing around with prosthetics. I've got a pile of mail in my lap. I'm rolling down the driveway. You know, I hit an acorn or something's fallen from the tree and I spill a bunch of mail. It's little things like that on a daily basis just get really frustrating when you're living with a disability. But what I really miss when I'm in the car is I just miss the feel of shifting. You know, I was never a race car driver or anything like that, but there's nothing more satisfying than coming to a stop on a steep hill and just getting that perfect clutch engagement to roll out, not look like a dummy. And then once you get to some open road, you just do that second to third or third to fourth shift. It's awesome. I really appreciate being able to drive with a hand control, but it's just not the same. So I went to college at West Point, and at West Point you can't have a car until after spring break of your junior year. So you wait years and years for it, and I was a little bit spoiled, I guess, but I'd gone to college for free, so my parents had been able to save up the money that they would have, some of what they would have spent on college, and my dad was very graciously, here Dan, go buy yourself whatever you want. So I had about $40,000, so this was about 2006. And so I started looking at classifieds. I'd always have a soft spot for Audis for some reason, not really sure why. But I was up in New York and I was like, well, it's gonna snow, all-wheel drive will be great. And I was just a big fan of the B6. I started looking around the classifieds and I found a B6 S4 in Massachusetts. I think it was in a town called Stowe. So I got my roommate, Carl. I said, Carl, drive out there with me. I'm gonna see this car in person, and if it looks good, not that I know anything about how a car should look, if it looks good, I'm gonna buy it. And we drove out there, met the guy, really cool guy. I was immediately relieved when he opened up the garage door and he had a Miata up on a 4-post lift in his garage. So I was like, and then the S4 was under it. I was like, all right, this guy clearly takes care of his car, so it'll be all right. Took it for a test drive. I think the guy was a little, you know, he was polite, but I think he was like, what is this 21-year-old kid doing buying a nice car? But I bought it and drove it home, and it was just awesome. It was great. You know, I had grown up in high school, bought a hand-me-down $3,000 Toyota Celica, so it was my first real car. It was awesome. Great car for the winters up there. Put a set of winter tires on it. Waited for the first big snowstorm, and then all my Army buddies and I went up to the student parking lot, and everyone was getting their trucks out and their Jeeps out, and everyone was stuck. And the little B6 S4 just pulled right out of the snowbank. She was fine. So I got Nogaro, just black leather. The blue Alcantara interior was a little too much for me. But it had the 6-speed. I believe it had a 4.2 liter V8, naturally aspirated. I think around 340 horsepower, I think is what it had. So enough that as a young driver, it was plenty fun. But I wasn't going to immediately kill myself. It still would have taken some effort to kill myself in that car, so I think it was a good fit. I did get RS4 wheels. I met a guy at a truck stop, handed him $500 in cash, got 4 pretty good condition RS4 wheels. I think it was a good deal. So I put my summer tires on those, and then the guy I bought it from, we had a full set of 17-inch winter wheels and tires. Graduated from college, went down to Columbus, Georgia, beautiful Fort Benning, Georgia, for a year and a half of infantry training. And then my first real job in the Army was out in Seattle. I lived in Seattle, but the base is at Fort Lewis in Tacoma, Washington, so about 50 miles away. The winter of '08 into '09, we had a really big storm. It shut down SeaTac, shut down the whole city, but I had to be at work on, you know, a Monday or Tuesday anyways. So I wake up at 4:30 in the morning like I always did in order to drive the 50 miles down to the base and be in the office in time for the soldiers to show up. Leave the garage onto a small little side street and it's just covered in snow. And I'm like, all right, I can probably handle this in the car. Luckily it's so early in the morning, no one's out. So I turn right, go up to the first stop light, 4-way stop. There's no one out. I wait for the light to turn green. I go across it, turn left, and then in this part of Seattle, it's pretty hilly. And so normally I just go into the intersection, turn left, and it's a downhill into a flat, another 4-way intersection, come to a stop at that light, and then go downhill again. And then by then you're pretty much close to the I-5 interchange. You get on the I-5 and you head down to work. I go through the first stoplight, I'm turning left, snow everywhere, thankfully no one's around. I start creeping down the hill, and I'm just thinking, if this green light, it's currently green, if it turns red, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stop. So I apply some brakes just to test, and there's just nothing there. She just starts to slide, and then she goes a little sideways. I get a little gas, try to turn it back around, and at some point I just go, I can't do anything about this. I just kind of let go of everything, and I ended up sliding totally sideways across that second intersection, kind of like a skateboarder, just sideways across the flat, back down the hill, and then she just pivoted around and went nose first. It was great, and no trouble at all. No one was out on the streets, but you know, in the back of my head I was like, if any other moron like me was out driving in these conditions, I probably would have ran into him. But then I drove all the way down to base, about 50 miles on I-5, and about halfway down the road, I'd kind of gotten the hang of things, not too much going on, no cars out at all. The car was handling all the snow on the interstate just fine. I actually came to a dead stop in the middle of I-5, and I did a couple of donuts in the snow, and then kept on going to base. I deployed to Afghanistan July of 2009. So I was single at the time, so living in Seattle. Had my parents come out, and the plan was they were going to take my car, drive it all the way back across the states back to Atlanta. I was in Afghanistan, and then I get wounded, and unfortunately I lost both of my legs. Of the many thoughts I had rather quickly was, wow, I can't drive my car anymore because it's a manual. This is going to be tough. You know, actually, you know, the honest truth is no one talked about it. Everyone knew I loved the car. Everyone knew I enjoyed driving. And, you know, all the serious health implications, all that stuff, I don't think anyone wanted to ask me like, hey, Dan, what are you going to do with your car? Because it was obvious what I had to do with the car. I had to get rid of it. So my parents held on to it for a long time. My poor dad, you know, the S4 had a pretty tight little sport suspension, and you'd hit any imperfection in the road and it was just jarring. It wasn't that fun. If you're young, it's fine, but my dad's not young. He called me up, he's like, Dan, I can't take this anymore. What do you want to do with it? And I said, you know what, actually, I just want you to sell it and keep the money. I'm still at the hospital up in Washington, D.C. My parents have the car, and I say, hey, I've got, you know, pictures on the computer. Let me put up an ad and I'll sell the car and you guys handle it. So this young guy came to Peachtree City, looked at the car, and bought it right then and there. So this was probably sometime middle to late 2010. A couple of years later, I'm back in town. I've now moved on. What I drive now is just an automatic transmission A4 Avant. I still like Audis, and the wagon is perfect for putting a wheelchair in the back. Something minor was going wrong with it. I take it up to the dealership to have some work done, and I see my car. I see the little blue Nogaro Jelly Bean S4 sitting in the parking lot. And so I asked someone at the dealership, and they're like, oh yeah, that's Steve's car. And then I was like, well, can I talk to Steve? And Steve comes out, and it turns out he had bought the car from my parents down in Peachtree City, and he was working at the dealership. And I told him, hey, you know, that was my car originally, and told him the whole story. And so that was just really cool to see that it hadn't actually gone anywhere. It's just been living here in Atlanta the whole time. So that made me happy.